Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this evening on Retirement Ready. And we're going to work through this evening on talking about building the future that you want. So a little introduction to myself to get us started so you know who I am and who's talking tonight. My name's Kristin Sutherland. I am a financial advisor and a strategic coach at Enable Me. My goal really is to give you financial confidence and to help you grow wealth, and in this context, to be retirement ready. So that's what we'll be focusing on tonight. I've got 3 decades of experience in personal property investment. I'm the past president of the Auckland Property Investors Association, have been there for the last 6 years. I'm also an author. I love the retirement space. It's really close to my heart. So I have a passion for that area. And I've also written a book about that. It's actually not the financial side, but the other side of retirement, so the psychological side, which is really important as well. But tonight we're focusing on that financial side. And I've got experience as a retirement coach from both that financial perspective and the wellbeing perspective. So hopefully tonight I can add some value for you as you are looking at thinking about retirement or planning for it, or just starting to, have those initial thoughts on what it looks like for you. So let's look at what we'll cover this evening. We're going to talk about retirement goals and timeframes and how they're important. I'm going to give you an idea of how we craft a personalized financial wealth plan. And we're going to look at optimizing income and investments, because that's very important as we start, thinking about and heading into retirement. And also decumulation strategies in retirement, different from accumulation, which we've all been so used to throughout our working life. We need to flick that switch and move into decumulation strategies. We're going to briefly touch on some estate planning options as well, because that's really important. And then hopefully at the end, if I keep moving it along, we'll have time for questions and answers. So a bit of a disclaimer, this presentation is provided for information purposes only, although I would love to all know you all personally. I don't, so this is not tailored financial advice. Okay, we're going to start with a poll. So I want to get you guys thinking, so please participate in this poll as we go. Now, the question is, and it gives me an idea of, where to direct the webinar as well. Are you confident you're on track to fund your retirement? Now, you'll see the options there of yes, I'm confident, I have enough. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll be okay. Nope, I'm not on track, or I don't have any plan to fund my retirement. So I'll give you a few seconds to make your decision on that, and we'll see what group we've got here this evening. Given that you've given up your Wednesday evening to be with us, I think that some of you have probably got an idea. All right, we might have some results there. Oh, okay, so 7% confident, all right. 56, I'm going to write these down because we'll remember them for later, 22 and 15. Okay, so that's pretty good. 22% of us not on track and 15% not sure. So that's very good to know, and well done you guys for turning up and starting to think about that plan. So let's jump in and start looking at what we need to think about. Now, we all want a comfortable retirement. I'm sure we don't want it to be uncomfortable, but many of us, and so there's quite a percentage this evening, so what are we, 37%, don't know really if we're on track to retire well. So what do we need to start thinking about? And it is all about thinking, and then planning, and then taking some action. What do we need to do in the first instance? So how do we create that wealth for retirement, or just have the funds available to live the retirement that we want to? So wealth in retirement is really about creating options. So we just want to create options for you. So firstly, you can decide to live where you want to in retirement, and that might be where you're currently living. It might be that you're going to make a big change and live somewhere else. So thinking about where do I want to live in retirement? Do I know yet? And if, you're looking at moving, what does that look like? Is it a downsize? Is it an upsize? Sometimes it's totally different. I know from my own personal experience, like my parents-in-law, they moved off a farm and they were going to somewhere, but they moved into a house that was actually bigger than the farmhouse because they wanted to have options for all the kids to come and stay and things. So thinking around, what does that look like for you? It might be that you retire early, or that you look at just scaling back hours. So retirement has really morphed in the last 10 years to be not just this, we all stop at 65. So is it for you looking at retiring early, because that's going to change the plan, or scaling back hours and you want to actually keep working? Because for some people, they want to keep working, but at less hours or less pressure or something like that. Thinking about the level of care now as we age, for some of us, it is going to be needed that we will leave some care. And what level of care do you want to receive? So thinking about that before it happens and trying to plan for it is really important. For others, wealth is about creating a legacy and leaving a legacy for, be that children, be that organizations. So thinking about, is that what I want to be planning for in retirement? And for people who have kids, it's about potentially being able to help the kids if that's what you want to do, if they've been nice to you along the way and you want to help them. But the other option is, the more options we can create, the safer that plan becomes in retirement. Because what if you had to retire early? Say you get sick, you lose your job, something that negatively impacts us. The more options we have, it gives us more solutions when we come across these problems. So really important to think about, I'm creating wealth, but what am I creating wealth for? And what does that look like for me? And only you will know that. So I can't answer that for you. It's you thinking and planning and having the thought, before it needs to happen about what that looks like. Okay, so interestingly, so we had about 57% that said, yep, I'm on track. 56% that were reasonably confident. So not too far away from the other stats we've got here. So 50% of Kiwis aren't prepared for retirement in its entirety. 70% think that they'll need to work past 70. It's a little bit of a scary statistic. So we want to help you to come up with the knowledge for yourself of, is that what it looks like for me? And only 34% of retirees could maintain their current lifestyle for 10 years plus. And given we hopefully are all going to live a bit longer, we want to make it a lot longer than that you can maintain that lifestyle for. So what are some of the options that we have got for funding retirement? So we know that we need to create choices. What are some of those options? So some of the options are, we could work longer, and that is a genuine option for some people if they want to. But actually what we find for clients, and we've worked with thousands of people over the years, is that most people actually don't end up working as long as they intended for all sorts of reasons. That might be health, it might be, it could be mental health, it could be physical health, all sorts of different reasons. They might need to care for someone. So just thinking around, can I realistically work for that long? But I want to create as many options as I can, just in case I can't do that. Downsizing your home. Now, I hear this a lot from clients. I'm just going to downsize and that's going to fill this gap for me. Yes, and it might do, but not all the times that we move that the home is cheaper. And so what we find on average is that this only funds about 3 years of retirement. So that can be part of our plan, but it can't be the whole plan. We might be thinking we're going to get an inheritance. And that would be lovely if it happens. But when we're doing financial plans, we actually don't factor those in because we don't know for certain if we're going to get it. It might be selling a business. And in this changing world of business, that's another uncertain one. There might be a market for it when we go to sell it, or that might have changed. So it is part of the plan again, but we don't want to solely rely on any one of these things if we can avoid it. A reverse mortgage, so that they get a little bit of negative press, but it is an option. We want to normally exhaust other options before we do it, but it's certainly an option if we need to do it to be able to fund retirement. And then they're spending less in retirement, so that is always an option, not one that people tend to like that much, but we might need to take a little bit of each of these to be able to fund that lifestyle that we want. And unfortunately, I get a lot of clients that say, but super will look after me. Super is probably less than what most people think. And super assumes, a few things. Firstly, we're mortgage free. So that's a really important thing. We're going to talk about it a bit tonight, of making sure as we go into retirement that we are mortgage free. Really important to try and hit that goal. It assumes we're working till we're 65, because it obviously doesn't kick in until we're 65. It generally is that we're not helping kids in this scenario, or other family members, because there's just not enough funds generally to do that. And we are pretty much living a no frills lifestyle. So you might have heard about that research that Massey University did, and it puts, the retirement lifestyle into a few buckets. And that lifestyle of no frills is pretty much what New Zealand Super is. So again, it's part of our plan, but we don't want to solely rely on it. So what if we haven't started planning yet? Let's look at our starting point. So, of course, many people aren't sure where to start when it comes to investing or growing their wealth ahead of retirement. They are unsure of what they need, where their money will be coming from, or even if they're on track. So, we want to do a few things. We've got to secure your financial foundation. So, they're the things we look at when we first start working with a client. We're looking at, well, what is the foundation, and we'll go into more detail on that. We need you to understand what you'll need, and it's really specific to you. So what my life will cost in retirement will be very different to what your life will be costing, and it'll be different to, many of the other people on here, because we will all want to do very different things. So understanding what you'll need is really important. We need to do that before we retire. Determine where that money's coming from. So having a plan and as long of a runway to implement that plan as possible, and then gauge how you're tracking currently. Are we on track? So we have to have a plan to know if we're on track, and then establish if we've got a gap. So if we do have a gap, how are we going to try and close it? So we're not saying that you can't close it, but we need to bridge that gap. And the more time we've got to do that, the better. So your retirement projections should be based on known factors. So we need to know how much life costs you, what you're actually spending, and getting data on that. Your actual savings rate. So how are you going? Even if you've got a plan, how are you tracking against it? And then, some key assumptions of the things that we talked about how much life is costing. A very regular question is, is there a number, that's easy for me to try and work out what my retirement will cost? And we do have a bit of a rule of thumb. So for many, what holds them back is not knowing where to start and how much they need for retirement. There are many unknowns, as I've talked about. If retirement feels a long way off for some people, we don't know what the world will look like, what inflation will do, whether New Zealand Super will still be here, whether it'll be means tested. So at Enable Me, we have a rough rule of thumb, and that's to set your goals on being roughly about 25 times your annual living cost. So fundamentally, we need to know what your annual living cost is for you. So if you can, that's a calculation you could walk away and do today of, what does my life cost me to live? If I times that by 25, and 25 is so that we get you comfortably till 90. So we don't know how long you're going to live. None of us do, but we want you to be able to live your happy lifestyle until 90. So that's our general rule of thumb, if you want to do a really quick calculation on that. Now, the wealth plan for retirement should be flexible as well, because life happens. We never know what's going to come along. So we give ourselves as many options as possible. It needs to be dynamic. So it needs to be able to change as things happen. It needs to have buffers. So those emergency buffers and built-in rainy day funds are really important, because we never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So the more buffer we can have, the better. And we want it to be enhanced by positive behavior and spending habits. So that's about you creating behaviors or structures around what you do to make sure that whatever it is you're trying to achieve is as easy as possible, because none of us are saying this is easy. It's as easy as possible. So putting those structures in place. And it's based on a strong foundation. So we're going to look at what some of those foundation things are. So when we first start working with a client, we're all about securing these financial foundations. So strong foundations are like building a house. They're everything. just like we wouldn't want to build a house on shaky ground, you can't achieve financial success without building solid money habits. Think of your habits as the concrete foundation. You want them strong so everything else stands tall. You don't want to be the rock to have financial discipline, but you do need to rock your habits. So it's really important to create those habits as early as possible. And actually, when we're working with clients, we say, we develop our money habits from 3. So, if you're having good habits, you might be teaching your kids or people that you're mentoring those habits as well. It's really important to, develop those as early as possible. One of our other financial foundations is about goal setting. So it's like going into the supermarket without having a shopping list. If we don't know what the goal is, we end up just buying a whole lot of rubbish. Or we drive around without a map. If we don't have Google Maps now, we tend to drive around a bit lost. If we don't have that plan or those goals, it's really hard to get there because we don't know where we're going. So goal setting is really important. And we work a lot with people on setting those big ones and small goals, so that we're achieving things along the way, but we have our big plan of where that's going. Now, cash flow management. It sounds a bit boring, I know, but it's really important because we need to know where your money is going, how it's flowing, how you're using it. Are you on track for what you said? If you said you're going to spend something, are you on track? And if we don't monitor that and do some cash flow management, we don't know. And then mortgage management, really important. So we, as I've said earlier, having that mortgage-free house is, our ideal. It's not going to happen for everyone. I realize that, but that's our ideal. And the other things are around debt and KiwiSaver. So mortgages, but also KiwiSaver. We need to know that what you're doing is working as hard as possible to get you to a really good position. All right, and when to start? Our preference is as early as possible, and I'm sure yours is as well. So I love the quote from Warren Buffett that says, someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. So the more options we can create, the more time we have to create them, the sooner we can identify problems, the sooner we can create solutions. So we want to start, if nothing else, you walk away from tonight and you sit down and start thinking about what is it that I want in retirement, and that starts the plan. Okay, so I mentioned KiwiSaver before, so let's touch on it. It's been in the press a lot. I did a few webinars, podcasts recently about it and all the changes that have come. Most of you, I'm sure, are aware that we've just had an increase in KiwiSaver from 3 to 3.5% as the minimum for employers. So that's great. We want everyone to stay on board with that because it just gives us longer savings in the future. So is it worth it? Yes, it's still worth it. I know that there's been some changes, but it is still worth it. It's deducted from your pay before you see it, which is really good. It's contributed to by your employer, so that's excellent. So effectively, you all just got a 0.5% pay rise, so that's nice. And it includes free money from the government. Now, not for everyone now, but, we'll take whatever free money we can get, so that's lovely. But it shouldn't be the only option for your retirement savings. So we want, something outside of that if we can, so that we've got options. As we said, the more options, the better. And if you're thinking of retiring early, so if that's your goal about retiring early, then you need to be investing in other things outside of KiwiSaver, because obviously we can't access this until we're 65, except for some very small circumstances, first home, illness, things like that. But we don't want to be accessing it unless we really need to. So I'm going to go through some scenarios, and this is, after working with many, many clients, what we see happen in these retirement scenarios around the mortgage. So I want to dig in a bit to the mortgage, what happens in terms of the time we've got to save and how important it is to get that mortgage paid off as soon as we can. So let's look at the default. This is what a lot of people do. So you go along, you buy a home, you take your 30-year mortgage, you pay it off, and by 65, you're mortgage free. That's great. Unfortunately, that does leave us with limited retirement options. So we're 65, we get in this graph, you'll see our green line is our KiwiSaver coming in. It comes through, happy days, and then we spend it living the life that's our happy life and the one that we want to be living. And for the average person, by 69, we've spent those funds. So again, it depends on your lifestyle and how much you've saved and how much you spend on food and all of the other things that we need to do to survive. But in this example, and for a lot of our clients, this is what happens. So we need to know what that gap is, and you'll see the black arrow line on here is the gap. So our gap at the moment is from 69 to 90, and how are we going to fill that gap and solve the problem for this client of giving them some more savings? So the one that we work on is that mortgage, as I've discussed. So a comfortable retirement really does rest on being mortgage free. So let's look at what that looks like if we do get to mortgage free sooner. So in this scenario, you'll see we've got mortgage free by 55, which is just giving us a bit of time. And this is still going to take discipline. Again, it's not easy. It's going to take some time that after we're mortgage free, we still do some savings. So that's the dark green line, and we're going to do some wealth creation. We'll look in a moment of what that might look like in terms of options. So we have some wealth creation going on. So we're still saving in that period. Then at 65, we retire. We get access to our KiwiSaver. And then you can see that our savings last a lot longer. If we're just spending as we did before, it's till age 80. If we do a little bit of, less spending or something like that, we can often stretch that to 90. So that might get us to that ideal age of 90 that we all want to live to and be healthy and be living our happy life, but it gives us the option that that's there. So what is some of those wealth options? So we're talking about wealth creation there. So I'm going to touch really quickly, because it is only half an hour that I've got to tell you about this, some of the different wealth options. So we've got shares and bonds, managed funds. Most people might be familiar with those. We've got things like gold, collectibles, digital currencies, electronic traded funds. So they're about, our funds investment as well. Some more funds, things like forestry, term deposits. So that's our lower risk investments, property and business. Now, there are obviously many ways to invest, but not all will suit your situation. So some of these options require a bit of capital to start. Others need time or expertise. But what we say is that the higher risk is generally the higher the reward, but it's also the greater level of uncertainty that comes. And we need to balance that risk reward for you personally. And again, this is going to be individual for everyone. And you need to think about, how comfortable am I with risk? If you're very comfortable with risk, then you might be able to take some more risk along the way to get higher returns. So let's just do a very general look at what is that sort of balance between risk and reward. So if we go to the riskiest end, it's generally business. So biggest risk, biggest reward, because we need a lot of capital to start that up, but we often make very good rewards from that. We go down the line, we've got sort of property and shares sitting around the same there. Then we go down a bit further into managed funds and ETFs. And remember, we're lowering down the risk here as we go. And then we go to term deposits and bonds, and then cash, which is our least risky, but probably our lowest return as well. So cash is stable, but it won't grow your wealth. Business is high risk and high reward. But if you have a savings gap, so if we've looked and gone, well, we're not going to quite get to that age that we want to, living the life you want to, we call that the gap. And remember from the chart before, if you've got a savings gap and it's a big gap, we might need to take a bit more risk to get the rewards that we want. So it's about balancing that and also what your appetite is for risk. So in general, if that gap is bigger than 300,000, so if you sort of start to do those numbers and you're seeing a gap that's bigger than 300,000, we're probably going to need some leverage. So leverage to bridge that gap, and the form that most people do this in, I'm not saying that it's for everyone, is property. So I'm going to give an example here of the power of leverage. So if we had, say, 160,000, so we've got 160,000 in cash. With property, 160,000 deposit lets us control about an 800,000 assets. That's a 20% deposit for this property. And a 6% increase, so we've said 6% for, I'm comparing managed funds and property, 6% for both of these means that we get a return of 9,600 on the managed funds, because we generally can't borrow money or leverage a fund. But on the property, if we get a 6% return, we get 48,000. So you can see here it is a higher return on investment for the property. So if we've got a really big gap, we might need to take a bit more risk, and that is looking at leverage and use leverage to close that. So that's just one of those options that we will look at with clients to say, what's the gap? And you can look at, when you're looking at this yourself, what's the gap? Do I need to use leverage to close that gap? Now, for some people, they don't like risk and they want to leave money in the bank. And we're not saying that you can't do that. It's just being aware of the impact of that. So the risk of leaving your money in the bank is that inflation is that silent thief of savings. So if we look at inflation for this example, a 3% year on year return, if we had 100,000 now, that nest egg would need to grow to be, in 10 years, 134,000 to be the same value as it is now and buy you the same amount of things. So just having cash is often risky in terms of inflation can really just devalue what you can buy with that. So interest won't grow wealth, and investing beats stagnation. So using this on some of those other investments can help us to beat inflation. Let's look, if some of you have investments at the moment, what might be some of the options. So if you've got investment properties at the moment, say you've already got some, we want you to look at, when you're thinking about this retirement plan, when you've come up with, okay, it's 25 times what my life costs me, how much do I need? Do I have it? What income do I need? All right, I've got an investment property. Is this working? So having a look at all of your investments, but this one on investment properties, are these properties still right to hold? So just because we've had it for a while doesn't mean we should keep it. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we might need to look at it and say, what's it doing? Is it fitting our plan? Is it giving me the capital growth I want or the income I want? And if it's not, should you buy it, sell it and buy a new property that does? Should you sell it and invest elsewhere? Maybe you need a bit more income that's quite liquid. So it's an income we can get quickly, as opposed to property where we'd need to sell it and would take us a period of time to do it. We might want to sell it and invest it in some managed funds. So thinking about, what am I trying to achieve with this asset? And is the asset doing it? And if it's not, then what do we do? You might want to keep it and leverage it to buy another one. So if we've got a really big gap to close, sometimes we'll use existing property to leverage to buy other ones. So just thinking about, if you've got existing property, what does it look like? What do we need to do? And I know that sometimes, and I saw a question pop up, so I'll just look at that sometimes we do lose money on property. And that is a risk. And when we're balancing that risk and reward, we do need to look at that and say, if something goes wrong, what are my emergency buffers? What am I going to do in that scenario? And try and plan for that as much as we can as well, because it has been quite tough in property the last few years. Believe me, I felt it. Okay, let's look at other investments as well. So if you've got, say, funds, we want you to review your portfolio, look at, should I sell them? Is there other ones that are performing better? What are the hold costs of these? And if you're unsure, if you're really confused, seek out financial advice. Just go and get someone else to look at it with a fresh set of eyes. All right, I'm going to go quickly through these next ones. So let's talk a little bit about this decumulation. So it really is a flick of the switch when you get to retirement, of flicking from accumulation, which you've done your whole life. It's really hard to decumulation. So how are you going to do that? What are your cash flow needs going to be? Maybe you've still got dependent children. Maybe you've got family members that are dependent. Maybe you're caring for someone. What are your needs, and how are you going to be able to do that from the nest egg that you've built up? And remember, we're always balancing risk and reward. So a few options on how we can decumulate our wealth. So we could live off our investment returns. Now that takes a pretty big nest egg, but that's, one of the options is you could live off those. You could take out a set amount per year from the investment. You could look at, one of the other scenarios is a withdrawal, a set percentage per year. So there's a lot of discussion out there. I'm sure if you read about that, about, taking 4% per year and how long that will last you. Or you could look at something like a phased approach. So this is when retirement is, coming up, and then we break our investments or our assets into different buckets. So we might have a bucket that's our, immediate 1 to 3 year bucket. and we need that to be something quite liquid. So it might be cash, it might be term deposit, something like that. Then we've got a slightly longer term bucket where we can take a few more risks with things, and then a very long term bucket of 10 years plus where we can really invest in growth assets. So that phased approach, it means we can sell down things, move them along our buckets, to make sure we've got the funds we need for that point in time, so that we're not trying to do everything all at once. So that's our phased approach. And just considering in retirement, there are different phases of retirement. So, the first 5 to 10 years, a lot of people are very active. They're ticking off their bucket list. It's awesome. We're traveling, quite high expenses from travel and things sometimes. Your investments for that period that you're doing that need to be low risk. I mean, we can have a bucket of high risk, but these immediate things need to be low risk, and it's our honeymoon phase. So, a lot of people, and this is the other side of retirement, is this well-being side, is making sure that we understand the other impacts of retirement and planning for those, for things like having our social networks aren't just our work friends, making sure we're thinking about hobbies that we might want to do in retirement before we get there, so that we're not just there and all of a sudden, it doesn't feel like it was meant to. So we call that the honeymoon phase. Then the next 10 years, we're a bit less active. We've got some rising healthcare costs and some more fixed costs. And in this phase, a lot of people go through a bit of a disenchantment. So, the honeymoon phase is over. Now you're into that, the daily routine of retirement. And it's making sure that you're, fulfilling yourself both financially and well-being wise, that you've got things that, top up your sense of worth and purpose, that you've got good social networks around you. All of those things really important to think about. And then in the final years, so it's generally our highest health costs, we're considering the things about legacy, planning for those. And when we first retire, this is the bucket of funds that we can invest in those growth assets, because we're not going to use it for a long period of time. And often it's the phase where people actually have a lot of reorientation with their sort of the psychological side and really find the purpose that's really important to them. And then a few things about future-proofing your wealth. So some things to consider. When clients come along, we talk through all things like insurance policies. So we want to make sure you've got enough, but not too much. So actually, a lot of the time I'm saying to people, why do we have that massive life insurance policy at this point in our life? And other times I'm saying to people, we really haven't got enough protection here for if the worst happens. So thinking around, for you, what would it look like if your partner wasn't around, if someone couldn't work? Have you got some protection in place? And my job when I'm working with people is to see into the future, and try and just put some guardrails around what would we do and what options could we create. So insurance policies are one of those things. It might be looking at trusts and seeing if you protect assets for children or for other dependents or family members. And then looking at the financial legacy you want to leave. So setting expectations for, be that family, be that charities that you're looking at, set those expectations up beforehand so that people maybe aren't disappointed. If you don't, if you care about what they think, is really important. And then having a will, it's amazing how many people don't have a will. So having that, it makes it so much easier for everyone else. And then a power of attorney. So this is if we're alive, but we can't be making decisions about either our health or our property, we need to have what's called these enduring powers of attorney so that others can make decisions for us when we can't. And having a think around, this is a more complex issue, so I'll just briefly touch on it, but rest home subsidies if you need care, just understanding what that might look like. So that was lots in 34 minutes. So some of those key takeaways are, I want you to understand your goals and your time frame. So how long is it to retirement? How long have you got? What is it you want to do? You can only decide that. So you need to work out, what do I think it's going to cost me? What's it costing me now? If I'm happy in my life, cost your life now and see what it costs. And then that might be what you want in retirement. Then use it to determine the strategy and the plan of how you're going to get there. Then check along the way. So are the investments that you've said, yes, that's what I want, are they working for you? And if they're not, we need to change them. And then determine how you'll manage your finances when you retire. So just thinking around, what does that look like for you? I need to flick from accumulation to decumulation at that point, and I need to protect my wealth and prepare it for your legacy. So wills, enduring powers of attorney, making sure we've had those conversations with family, just protecting all of that because you've worked hard for it. So let's protect it and make sure it goes where you want it to. So thank you very much for listening. I think we do have some time for questions. So Amy's going to come on and read some of those questions for me, I think. Amy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for your time, Kristin, and also to everyone who joined us this evening. So some of these questions that were submitted, we can only touch on a few, sorry, but first one, I am mortgage free and I want to get ready for retirement. Currently, I'm trying to decide whether to change my job to one that has a lower salary but is better for my well-being. Do you have any suggestions on how to approach making this decision?
Yeah, so we can really use a lot of those strategies we talked around tonight of what does retirement look like for you and what are you going to need? Because until you know what you're going to need, we don't know what that strategy is. So what's the financial impact of taking that lower paying job and then weighing that up with the health benefits that it might be? And then thinking around, I could take that lower paying job maybe now if I wanted to longer term. Maybe I want to work part-time later so I can take a bit of stress off now for my own health and well-being if it fits my financial plan, because I know what that is long term. So it's really back to that, having the plan to see what the financial impact is of doing less work, because health and sustainability is really important. Like, I say to people, there is no point having a plan if you can't sustain it. So if that, role is really something that mental health wise you can't do, then don't do it. So we need to change that, but you need to know what impact that has. And then what are you trying to build in retirement? Is it just income for yourself? Is it, wealth for others? Is it a legacy? Does that still achieve that goal? So taking all of those back to that goal and then saying, I'm considering that, and the lower salary still works, perfect.
That's great. Thank you, Kristin. Now, also, are there any considerations I should take into account if I'm planning for retirement as a single person instead of being a couple?
Yeah. Yep. And it is different. So, for our single clients, that housing security is actually more important. If you're single, because we haven't got as much income coming in, we haven't got, a backup often of income. If you haven't got mortgage free, it just makes it harder. So we really focus on trying to get to that mortgage free point if we can for a single. Having that emergency buffer is even more important than a couple, because if we've got a couple, we've got a chance at two sources of income. So it's really important to have that emergency buffer and knowing what that needs to be. And we start with 6 months of living costs. So having 6 months of living costs so that we can get through 6 months and it gives us options. It's not going to solve the problem often in 6 months, because if we've got sick, it won't solve it, but it gives us options. The other one is social connection. So if you're a single person actually going into retirement, sometimes it's not the financial plan that's lacking, it's the social connection plan. And that can cause problems as well. So one of the biggest risks for single people is not having that social plan as well. And that might be looking at things like, where am I going to get my sense of worth from? Maybe I'm going to volunteer to keep my social network up, because outside of work, that's not going to continue. What hobbies am I going to do? Maybe I'll start those before I retire. But social connection, really important for singles, more so than couples. Although I guess some couples, some of them don't like each other that much, but you have got another person there. But for a single person, like, just really focus on that social connection as well. And then those insurances and estate planning is even more important, I think, for single people. So making sure you've got those enduring powers of attorney in place, so that, if the worst happens, someone else knows your wishes of what you want to do. So it's not someone else making the decision for you. And if you haven't got, a partner that's there and might know them, not that all partners know our wishes, but having those enduring powers of attorney are really important, and health ones as well. So who's going to make those decisions for you? So I think that's, a few of the things for singles. I think it is harder in terms of the money side. So we just need to make sure we are even more planned and organized.
Great. Thank you, Kristin. Now, there's one that actually came up in the chat while you were running over some options to fund retirement. It said two of these options are relying on home ownership. What if you don't own a home?
Yeah, so I say to everyone that I'm working with, we start with where we are. So if you don't own a home, that's fine. We're putting the stick in the sand, and this is where we're starting from. Then we look at what are the options. We might need to have more emergency funds available, or we might need to have more income that is a regular income so that we know we can fund a rent cost. We might need to focus more on growth assets so that, it might not be a home, but it can be other assets so that they protect us against inflation. So if we're not in home ownership, our risk is rent rising because that will be affected by inflation. So we need to look at the mix of assets. Now, so it's not insurmountable. We just start where you are and we plan for that. We're just saying our ideal scenario is this, but then we work from wherever you're starting from. So thinking about growth assets, protecting against inflation if we've got rent involved, and making sure we give ourselves as much runway as we can.
Great, thank you. Now, another one from the chat. I mean, we've got a lot of people in their 40s and 50s on here, but we've got somebody in this, they're 65. Is it too late to start planning for the next 20 years?
Too late to start planning. No, there is, there's actually a lot we can do, and it depends too on, you might not want to be stopping work at 65. I don't know what the scenario is for the person, but there is definitely many things we can do, and for you to think about, if you've got assets, how hard are they working? So if we haven't thought about it a long time beforehand, we need to really focus now on making sure the assets that we've got are working as hard as possible, because we haven't got the runway and we haven't got that time for assets to grow. So we just, as I said, we start from where we are. If we're at 65, never too late. So let's look at what you've got, how long are you going to be working, what does life cost? And then it might be sometimes for people, I have worked with clients where it's the realization of, I'm not going to be able to live this same lifestyle. So what's important to me so that I can prioritize that if I do need to be cutting down spending. So it's finding out about what's important to you, and you tracking your spend and seeing what you spend on things and knowing what is it actually that's my non-negotiable that I am unwilling to take out of my budget. That's the starting point often for, okay, so that's a non-negotiable, but the other things, they don't make me happy, so I'm going to take those out. So it might be we need to reduce costs, and the longer we've got to sort of work on that, the better, but 65, no problem.
Great. Thank you, Kristin. Now, I think we could probably be here all night going through some of these questions, but that's all the time that we have for this. However, if you do have any more questions, I know there's a lot popping up now. Kristin, if you could just flick to the next page and run through our offer. And also a little bit about the financial consultation, please.
Yeah. So if you really don't know, if you're I don't even know where to start, you can come along and have a chat to us. There's a session called a financial consultation. It's a 90-minute strategy session where you'll be working with a coach in that session, and we'll try and get a pretty full picture of your finances, look at, is there any areas where we can really identify inefficiencies, help there and then investigate, are you on track? So we're not solving all of your problems just then, but we are looking at, where am I now? Where am I hoping to get to, and am I on track? So this is what's called a financial consultation. And if you want to do that, you can book that consultation with us. A special offer for tonight, so thank you for giving up your Wednesday night and coming to listen to us. It's $100 if it's booked before midnight tonight. So QR code is there. If you want to come along, have a chat, it's a very cheap investment really in your future for $100. And if you don't do it though before midnight, it will be $149 after that for new customers. So please, if you're really not sure, come along, have a chat to us. You get a lot out of that session, and then it might be you're like, yeah, I'd like to work with you further, or it might be like, now at least I know where I am. So come along, have a chat. We're always happy to talk about retirement, especially me. So come along and have a chat to us.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who joined. Have a good evening.
Good night.